Hey guys, and welcome to LBB 91 Coaching. Today, we're talking to you guys about attachment styles. I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship and you just can't seem to figure the other person out. Maybe they're too emotionally distant. Maybe they have these kind of clingy personality types where they're just constantly on you and want reassurance. Or maybe you dated somebody who just seemed to be almost too perfect, too calm, too collected, get everything right, but it makes you feel nervous. Well, today we're going to help you with that. We're talking to you guys about attachment styles, which was developed by John Bowlby in the 1930s. Oh, I know. You're probably thinking to yourself, what is a 1930s theory going to do to help you in 2025? Well, stick around for this video because I'm going to help you understand how this impacts relationships today. But before you do anything else, make sure you like, you share, you subscribe, and you click on that fabulous bell button for notifications of the uploads as well, because this is going to be a crazy series that we're going to start breaking down. Well, first of all, let me grab my trusted helper because I want to be honest with you. I need to be able to, break this down in a way that you'll be able to understand. And I like to have visuals that helps us all. All right. So first and foremost, like I said, the attachment styles was developed by John Bowlby. He was a British psychologist who understood that young children, the way they attach to their parent caregiver, this also bled into relationships as adults. So the emotional bond that you had with your parent, mother or father, because I know a lot of times we say mother, it's actually mother or father, whoever the main caregiver is, how that child would attach to that parent was often how they would exhibit certain traits depending on their attachment style in adult relationships. So this work was also further built upon by Mary Ainsworth, who was another British psychologist who developed the fourth in the four attachment styles. So the first one is actually secure. Everybody's working to be more secure. And I'll explain what that is in a few seconds. And then there is dismissive avoidant, fearful avoidant, and then there is anxious. So those particular three, there was only actually anxious and and avoidant at first before Mary Ainsworth came about. We kind of revolutionized it, and then she added a fourth one, which was fearful avoidant, which we might have heard as being dysfunctional or disorganized attachment. So what are the four attachment styles available? Well, this one is secure, the middle one, which is what I said before, we're all striving to be. When you're in that relationship, if you have an insecure attachment, you might find that relationship a little bit boring. Why? Because you're used to a level of chaos and a level of insecurity. You're used to certain behaviors being maladaptive, maybe manipulative, maybe you're having to work for that love, maybe you're used to having to fight for that love, that little bit of toxicity that you're used to. The secure person probably won't give you that. But then the other three are there as well. We've got the anxious, preoccupied. Those are the people who are consistently high anxiety but low avoidance. What does that mean? Well, when they get stressed in the relationship by seeing certain behaviors of the other person or even environmentally, then they start to have a high anxiety. And due to that anxiety, they want to cling. Whereas when it comes to the dismissive avoidant, when it comes to situations that are stressful, they want to avoid and push back. And so there's quite a bit of a difference there, right? And then we have fearful avoidance who tend to do a bit of both because they both have anxiety and avoidant traits. I know, crazy. But that is really an interesting aspect because when you look at relationships, when you have someone who's anxious versus avoidant or fearful avoidant with dismissive, there are some interesting kind of dynamics that do come to play. So as I was saying before about anxious being high anxiety but low avoidance, anxious people are not trying to avoid the situation or the people. They want to cling, they want to get closer, and they want to get a hold of you in essence. And a fearful avoidant person has what we call both hot and cold traits. So they sometimes are really very clingy, and in other moments, they don't want nothing to do with your ass. And that wasn't very professional when I said ass, but you knew what I meant. And then dismissive avoidance. Oh, I've gone ahead of myself. Dismissive avoidance are very low avoidance, but very low anxiety, sorry, but high avoidance. So when they're dealing with you, if they find that you're maybe encroaching on their turf emotionally, they might not tell you. They might just distance themselves because they're now trying to avoid. But that is them not having the anxious aspect. They're not trying to cling. They want to remove themselves. So again, like I said in a very earlier statement, if you've experienced somebody who's a bit more emotionally distant, that's probably a more dismissive person. Maybe if you've experienced somebody who's a bit more clingy, that's probably more anxious. And the fearful avoidant, well, depending on what spectrum you fall on, you might get a bit of both. And that might be a little bit confusing when you see the chaos, okay? So again, these are another quadrant I brought to the table to make you understand about how the attachment styles kind of play about now. Excuse my little messiness on there. StreamYard doesn't want to play games, fair games with me, so we'll have to make do. But what I've done is just, I put it in a quadrant to say how they feel about and how they feel about themselves versus how they feel about others. And it's basically what I just explained in a second or two. So the secure attachment, children who are grown up in a secure attachment household are allowed to express themselves. They are autonomous at the right time. They've been given freedom at the right time when that child is expressing those needs. They are able to be catered to. They have not been punished or abandoned for expressing their thoughts or their opinions or their emotions. They grew up in a household where they felt safe by either party who was a caregiver. They were treated with care, and they were not necessarily, mistreated by being shouted at, screamed at, abused in any particular way. They've grown up in a household where it was, again, emotionally safe. And therefore, because of that, the way that they deal with stress, they have the core skills to be able to deal with difficult scenarios. So if the relationship isn't going the way it needs to go, they're not allowing themselves to be deregulated to a place where they behave incongruent to their values and their goals in essence. They're going to make sure that they communicate because they know how to communicate because they've been allowed to communicate from a very young age. And so they're going to have an essence of confidence. But because of these particular traits, because they're not fall into the insecure attachment, what you will find is when you do date them and you have an insecure attachment, you might find them a little bit boring because they just seem to communicate well. They understand, they want to be able to spend time with you, and if you don't spend time with them, then they're really communicating well by texting you and saying or calling you saying what's going on. They're not projecting. That doesn't mean they don't have arguments. It doesn't mean they don't have their own downfalls, but they just don't seem to be toxic like the rest of us in that space. The fearful avoidant. Okay, these children exhibit a combination of behaviors, as I said before, disorientated but confused because they grew up in households where the parents were both the comforter and the abuser. And when I say abuser, I mean that in a very broad spectrum because there can be emotional neglect, which can be abusive, but there can also be aspects of where there's verbal abuse, where the parent is consistently angry and always shouting, and then next minute is very comforting to that child. And what happens to the child is that they're not aware, they're not sure how to tackle the parent. The child needs the parent. So the child is trying to figure out a way of how to get the love from that parent. And because the parent is inconsistent with their love and is unpredictable, which is what causes the fearful avoidance, you're not sure what you're going to get. You're going to get a parent that's going to be angry today, but then loving you tomorrow. Shouting at you today, but then hugging you tomorrow. Right. And so because of that inconsistency and the unpredictability, the child actually suffers and does not have a consistent pattern um, of problem solving with the parent. Whereas with someone who's anxious, their parent is very consistent one way. Dismissive children, their parent is consistent very much one way. And so therefore they come up with a solution to deal with the caretaker and the child and the parent, sorry. Dismissive avoidance. They are grown up in households where their emotions were neglected. So their emotional expression, their ability to be able to communicate was stifled. The parent would neglect them either by shutting them down or by ignoring them. And not actually paying attention to their emotions. Like, for instance, boys don't cry, which is why a lot of boys grow up to be men who are dismissive. Because when you're told not to cry, you're also being told not to express your emotions. And so, therefore, what you're going to get is an adult who doesn't want to express their emotions and thinks it's normal. And the problem with that is that dismissive people then tend to create hyper independence, pushing away from people, not wanting to be succumbed by what we call enmeshment. They don't want you to be all over them. Okay, they don't want you to be clamor over them. They want a level of distance because they've learned how to be independent and they expect you to also be independent. The anxious attachment. The anxious attachment is quite interesting because many people can be more anxious in their attachment because they grew up in households that could be actually quite secure, but maybe one of the parents was a helicopter parent, or the parent was a bit too, how do we say this? Too safety, too much where they are closing the space on that child, so they're not allowing that child any freedom to be able to express itself freely outside of the confinements of that parent. And so the child actually is stifled, and because it's given rules and given regulations, and it's it's not allowed to explore the world without it being wrapped in bubble wrap. What can end up happening is that some of those children can end up becoming very anxious, right? So, because of their need for closeness and reassurance, what they're afraid of is abandonment, right? So when the parent can be too enmeshing or too involved, or the parent can be quite inconsistent in their love caring, this can also create the anxious attachment style. You can have a parent who loved you, but you know that they went to work, and when they worked, you were left alone, right? But it would come back and be a wonderful parent, right? But because you were left alone at home for a few hours, to be in your own devices, what you can find is that then that parent, although you love them and they love you, and you can see that love and care, you can actually develop an anxious attachment. And what that will end up doing is, when you get into relationships, you want to cling. Okay. All right. So I think this is where we will stop it, because I want to do a part two. I don't like videos going on too long. I want you to understand something. Once you understand where you fit in, whether it's anxious, whether it's fearful avoidant, whether it's dismissive, you really will begin to understand a set of behaviors that come along with it as to why you do what you do. Now, this is obviously an introductory video that I did, and we coach clients all the time around their attachment styles, because it really does make a difference in relationships. In fact, it allows you to understand why that person is also reacting you in a particular way, and how you get triggered, and how you can also begin to heal, so that you can begin to operate in a more healthy fashion in relationships. So we're going to drop a part two where we talk about the actual behaviors that are aligning with these particular attachment styles. So stick around on this channel. Make sure you've liked it, you've shared, and you have subscribed. And if you're somebody who is needing coaching as well, because you feel like, relationships are not going the way you want them to go, and you're starting to lose hope, even if you're not starting to lose hope, reach out to me. My link is down below in the description box. We'd love to hear from you as well. And hopefully we'll be able to help you heal, grow, and transform. Much love, much appreciation. We'll see you again soon.